you all for coming. And, in these speaker series, it seems to me like we have a mix of two different things. So first we invite in speakers who've really built really neat systems and have something exciting to talk about. And then we have the people who have really changed the way we look at the world. And I think Doug Engelbart here really fits in that second category. And a lot of you maybe are too young to know that most of what we see as a modern computer system today has risen out of the vision that Doug had 30 years ago, the invention of the mouse and Windows systems and the idea of hypertext, which is not yet fully realized, but is what this company is built on, as well as other ideas and help systems and so on and so on. And so, having Doug here is really like having a time machine that lets us look out 20 or 30 years into the future. So let's let him take it away and see where the world's going to end up.
So if you did a good job there, I could just say, well, thank you very much and leave. So I've tried to think a long time about how can I make a presentation that will teach you something or educate you or keep you awake and still tell my whole story. And it turned out that probably wasn't doable. So I had two women who are very energetically oriented about how to tell stories, etc., come this morning, and they pared me way down. So if I get off track, it's their fault. But anyway, this title is very meaningful to me, and what's a collective IQ will come out a little bit early in the thing, and we'll dive down pretty deeply pretty soon. And so this sort of stems from way back, that just engaged, the 25-year-old country kid, that's me then. I'm a 79-year-old country kid now. Anyway, I just got engaged and heading in for work. I worked as an electrical engineer out at Ames Lab, as a matter of fact. And so I said, oh boy, it's going to be exciting to get married. I was thinking all the planning and the family stuff, and then I started to try to think about the job, and I realized, I never thought about having career goals. I was too much of a country kid, ingenuous, so I did that. And so what do you think happened? This is what popped out of my head. So if I'm going to get a professional goal, and I just bought it. Okay, that's what I'm going to pursue. I had no idea what it meant. So like 3 months later of reading and studying and talking to people, etc., I got to this thing, see. So that goal emerged: as much as possible to boost mankind's collective capability for coping with complex urgent problems. That every big problem I could picture that I could go after to make the first goal be right, I began to realize how complex the big problems are, because they involve so many people and so many factors, and political things as well as plain technical or dollars or whatever, and that they have to be dealt with collectively. And our collective ability to deal with complex urgent problems isn't increasing anywhere near as fast as the complexity of the problems. And that's still true today. The complexity zone is going up faster and faster. So I feel like going after that ability for collectively coping, that I call a collective IQ, is, to me, it's just a matter almost of how we have a chance to survive as a race, because there's no guarantee. And I got this image of ants that grew up and climbed up and made a nest in a tree, and it got bigger and bigger, and the boughs were whopping like this. And any of the visual ants inside that could tell anybody, nobody would believe them. That's something you don't bother about till the thing broke and it fell in the water below, and all the ants died. So, there are problems facing the Earth today that could be that bad, and we just can't get them in sight. So, anyway, that's. I didn't know where to go to school to learn about that or anything. So I thought, well, I'll go learn about research. So I went to Berkeley, got a PhD, because they were building a computer. But that's before there were computers, and So I could just tell you a lot of stories about what you call the paradigms that exist in society. That's their perception about what's going on in the world and what you can do. And boy, it just, if you were talking about things that didn't fit in the paradigm zone, you just got, so I got explained to me carefully that I probably wouldn't do very well staying and teaching like I thought I was going to do in university, because peer review, if they hear this kind of stuff coming out of your mouth, you'll never get there. So there were lots of stories from the old days about that you kids wouldn't like to hear. I don't know. And I think the world is slowly changing. So here's one way to look at this, as saying any collection of quite a few people that you see around this this blob here, all communicate with each other, but they're commonly supposed to handle some big tough problem out there. So they're interacting, ingesting, bringing, scanning information, etc., recording their dialogue, collecting intelligence. In some way they've got to generate a knowledge product, which is sort of say, how do we get the understanding we need? So this thing of collectively developing, integrating, and applying knowledge, CODIAK, I started calling that the kind of capabilities that you need. And so this whole thing is a problem. And then this particular set of knowledge in there, I came to calling a dynamic knowledge repository. And that's going to follow us all the way through this talk as sort of the central thing of mixed technical and human kind of things, that how do you develop a body of knowledge that gives you the best possible understanding of the kind of challenge you're facing together. And we're far short of that. And Google does a good job of saying, hey, what's out there that might be useful, but how do you take that and integrate that into here's what the current state seems to be of the knowledge. There are conflicts at different places like this. These 17 conflicts have been resolved temporarily because this is what seems to counter them, but here are some open ones, etc. And so that's been sort of the target, but as we'll talk about anyway. So how do you get the understanding you need? How do you unearth and assess the different candidate solutions? How do you assess your resources and your operational capabilities to select the appropriate solution commitments you're going to make? How do you be effective in organizing and executing that selected approach? And you're bound to have unforeseen complications come up that you have to monitor and be able to adapt to. So all of that takes the best understanding you can. And when they get really, really big problems, tough ones, that's a central challenge. It's not the only challenge, but it's the one I decided to follow and say. And so capabilities. Way back in the early 60s, I spent a year and a half in solitary confinement generating a think piece that I called Augmenting the Human Intellect. And out of that came a lot of perceptions that really hold true. They didn't do me much good in the early days because they didn't fit the paradigms. But now to me they're very, very meaningful. So this thing about capability and capability infrastructures is something I'll go into now, but I'll try to go by pretty quickly and get down to things that might be more interesting technically to you. So he says, okay, for you or any organization or any collection of the civilization that has said we have this problem in common, the capability for dealing with it rests, and any capability you say is essential, like maybe this central one here is your capability to handle your professional role. Well, that's depending on a bunch of other capabilities, and they in turn are depending upon others. And it's not a hierarchy, it's just an infrastructure that goes on down like this. And way down here are some pretty basic kind of capabilities you have to have. And so, you know, the thing, so much orientation in the world today is sort of like, oh, it's the technology, boy, they're the things. We're going to invent a technology, it'll come in and it'll fix everything. So that was what I was hearing a lot in the 60s, that office automation, for instance. I just said, hey, wait a minute, you know, you're coming in and making a change, and there's got to be a lot of other changes that go with it. Well, like what? What do you mean other changes? Well, I didn't have any, I just invented the term human system, and no anthropologist or anybody has blown me out about that, but there really are all those kinds of things that generally adapt on some new artifact or technology that comes forth to sort of serve society. And whatever image people had at the outset of, boy, what this is going to do, you know, the evolution would start changing the environment a great deal. And I got very interested in old cars way, way back. And so I was aware of the kind of dialogues and activities going on in the turn of the century when automobiles started to appear. So if you went back 100 years from now and talked to some well-educated, dynamic business person or whatever, and started to talk to him about what cars could become, and they just pretty soon would just not believe you. And like women probably aren't going to be able to drive. That was pretty common in there. 35 miles an hour top speed. Boy, you just can't go in like that. So then if you try to describe a freeway travel today, you know, 70 miles an hour. Well, how do you get on? Get them to stop for you? No. You merge. And then describing the merging thing, you could just see them cringe. So he's going 70 miles an hour, and he slows down a little bit to let you just come in, because if he didn't, you'd crash. And yeah, right, that's right. So he'll slow down. Well, how do you check to be sure? You use your rearview mirror. What's that? What's a mirror up here like that? You check on that? You got to be kidding. You realize they used it for shaving and powdering your nose, face. And no thought about that you could get judgment of what's happening, you know, 20 yards behind you at 70 miles an hour. How much do they weigh? Oh, 4,000 pounds. Oh, God. See? So they simply wouldn't believe that you could get conditioned, but nobody just takes it for granted. They don't even think about it today. Or you stop at a stoplight. Oh, yeah, okay, well, I see. Well, of course, if it's the red light and there's nobody else there, you go ahead, don't you? No. Oh, you've got to be kidding. The culture. So there are a great number of things you do when you're driving. If you stop to realize it, you realize you're driving in a lane, 60, 50, 60, 70 miles an hour, and how much attention do you pay about keeping that car in that lane? Just very little. You can be talking to everybody, and there's all kinds of automatic things that your perceptual machinery grabs for you and adjusts for it, and that would just be out of people's picture. So the many other things you look at. Elevators coming in. Oh, how high was the highest building then? Oh, 6, 8, maybe 10 stories. Oh my gosh. So that was automating your way up to the 10th floor, huh? Yeah, but look how much it changed the world. So much higher. So anyway, this is what goes on. So the thing is, you can't, I just say over and over again, there's nobody that understands this dynamic system enough to know what in 5 years it's going to be like, how the dependence on what kind of technological capability and stuff is really going to be in this world. So to complete this story a little bit more here, it says, okay, there's these basic human capabilities that the uneducated, untrained, unconditioned person has. So with that has to go skills, knowledge, and training. It says, yeah, that's right. And all of that together, I had to invent a name, call that the augmentation system. That system is what provides us humans with the kind of capabilities we operate on today and such. And so all of this tool system, human system, etc., has evolved culturally for a long time. And so we're in the middle of a rate of evolution that's just it's unprecedented. So here's something to think about is the world's full of human-computer interaction kinds of studies. But the real thing is, how does a human interact with that augmentation system and learn to adapt and adjust? And so this is kind of the whole picture I've been operating on all this time. And I go in this detail here because I want to... Is there a clock in file? Jesus, it is? So I start at 2:15 and it's a half an hour. Boy, I'm sorry. I want to go faster. But this was just a fundamental sort of way in which the thing got established. And we'll move to talking about some special subset of the tool systems, all based upon this dynamic knowledge repository as a real capability target that we have. So you look in a matter of scale, that same model, I contend, holds for every one of these organizational sizes and fits. boy, so you look at that and says, the question of scaling comes in a bit. So he says, yes, here's my organization or my country or something sitting down there with its DKR development going, and it's got all these peers that are part of the whole organization. And the whole thing has this DKR stuff for handling the larger scale problem. And you just know that you can't have different structures and conventions, etc., among the different DKRs in there, because they all aggregate to be the common one the whole group fits on. So this sort of tells you the scale. And it just won't work that if somebody uses a word, somebody else uses something else, that they don't have processes by which the respective contributions of the knowledge packages that you put in there can be really integrated. And that integration is not just something that you can cite that document. So we got things to say about that. So anyway, this building, using and evaluating DKRs is a really central thing. And it's interesting to say that the Google search functions have an interesting role to play in there about how you find things. But then there's that whole business of integrating it all that's left over, that it can still facilitate that. So one of the things we talk about is how are you going to get that evolution going? And you have to get groups of people and organizations that start working together to help cultivate and develop that. And we've come to call it a networked improvement community. And it can be improving any kind of capability that the different member organizations agree, let's all work on this common sort of need for capability. So the particular kind of capability then that we give a special focus on is this dynamic knowledge repository, the capability for doing it. And there are important things to talk about it. So anyway, this is a real kind of research. And everybody's been telling me, well, get through this stuff fast, Doug, so you can get at what these guys will want to see is some of the things that they might be able to do. So anyway, like 15 years ago, I just said, look, we got to have an open hyperdocument system. I didn't know about open source then, but it's the same thing. It's the knowledge containers and the processes on them, etc., have to be open source so that it evolves like a natural language. Because so much of what you're going to do with this kind of tool system is essentially dealing with natural language and knowledge. And so the operations and such need to be saying that you've got to have a common language about trying to tell somebody that their ontology is mixed up, etc., like this, and so on. So there's very, very much that, and so that's something that is complicated. So very early in the 60s, even 70s, when I was getting research money, to me, Ted Nelson coined the term hyper, which is fine, but I've been so puzzled by the fact that it seems to be just limited to having links that point to something. And we were doing a lot more. So I'm proposing that the world takes the term hyper and says, let's say a hyperdocument is something in which everything you can do with a computer support that's beyond what the old technology of printing could provide for you. Let's call that hyper. Because here are things that we were doing beyond just the link. That our addressability for our links just from the beginning went to, so I say you want to be able to cite any object in another document, not just the document. So we had that provision. What do you think? So your link could address and point to any object. And there are all kinds of other things too. It had indirect addressing, just like you have a direct addressing in programming. It just says, hey, I'm pointing to this cell or this module or something like that, and it has a link in it. So I want to go there and take that link. That can be part of an address path. And you can have implicit addressing. Things like, this word is implicitly linked to its definition in the dictionary, or to its definition in a given glossary, or to its definition and description in the programming language. It's an operation like this. So we had that working. We had include functions that at some point here you could say, I want to include that whole chapter or that whole section, and just one of the viewing options said, oh, I only want to see that thing it says you want to include, or I want to actually have the inclusion done. So we had many, many things like this going, and they just give you such a rich environment. And the prevailing paradigms were that the users have to have something very easy to learn, or they're not going to get it. And so we just sort of learned our lesson and went into hibernation for a few decades. But that system is something that it sort of broke a connection that disabled me from being able to come and actually demonstrate some of those things for you. But anyway, the optional viewing too, that, not just the way the page was printed. So the very first kind of thing we optioned is, oh, you exercise this little option and bingo, you just see the first line of every paragraph. And it turns out to be an extremely good way to scan and see something. Oh, if the building if you had a hierarchically structured document, which is very, very useful, just show me the top level and only one line. Okay, well, just the first line of the next level too. Oh, I want to see their address, and they all have a location address, 1, 1, 2, 3, 4, or 1A, 1B, C, or 1B, 1, 2, so that you can show that or not show that. You could say, I want to see only those with certain content. You could see that. So the flexibility on that just grew and grew. And anyway, and the command language actually turned out to be like object-oriented, verbs and nouns. And it's amazing how the flexibility of that grew, that the vocabulary just grew until you'd have operations like, what's this verb called transpose do? Oh, it just interchanges. Interchanges what? Well, whatever object you describe in your noun. 2 paragraphs, bingo. 2 chapters, bingo. Anyway, the flexibility of editing and moving around and viewing and then jumping to where you want to go without having a link, just jump. So those things all just provided a working environment which just is unequaled still today. And we brag about it or something, but they said, okay, it was ahead of its time. That's our word for it. I mean, it wasn't, it might be say, oh, it was a total failure because it'll never see again. But really, it's the kind of thing that this hyper term, it says, look, why don't we really go after and capitalize on the fact that the computer can help us do that moving around? And in that model of a augmentation system, there was the human basic capabilities there, and there's one of the basic capabilities called perceptual. And you say, oh, what's that? Oh, that's like you can look in a mirror and see what's happening. That you can look at a set of characters that represent now consonants and vowels, and you don't see that. You see a word. And you don't just see a word, you see the meaning. And you just sweep along to it. And that machinery's been in your head for thousands of years. So 5,000 years ago, they had an alphabet. But now we got things we can portray, symbolizing lots of flexible other ways, and that machinery is there to learn to adapt to use that. So, like one thing I just waiting to do if I were smart enough, I'd get a sentence parser. And then when I'm reading text, I would start experimenting with what color to make what parts of speech. That pretty soon that perceptual machinery to get used to it, and boy, I bet you a great deal that we'd be able to read faster and more comprehensively. So, anyway, so in this evolution, it says we'll start with something called a hyperscope. We extend the viewing and linking options. We'll add optional user interface systems. And that's what I really feel like. You have this open hyperdocument system evolving. You can plug in different user interface systems to say, okay, you got one for the pedestrians and one for the high performance. I'd be willing to bet that in the programmers doing heavy programming work, that you'll really migrate to the really high performance kind of things that otherwise people say that's too hard to learn. But you ought to have both. So anyway, there's a lot of evolution there that's there to go after, and I would like to see it get started. So, anyway, so what's the... Did someplace we lose the diagram of the hyperscope? Oh. So it starts with saying, okay, you've got target legacy servers. So we're saying, look, let's provide linkage into everything we have as kind of knowledge packages, not just HTML. So the thing is that there's an intermediate server that's when it's given this new kind of URL, it'll point to any known legacy document type, and it'll transform it into an intermediate file that's standard. So then the browser sits there and can get a picture generated by the view generator as to what sort of a view you want to see. And the transformer will be able to give every paragraph, and as we learn more and more about what kind of objects to have explicit kind of tags with algorithms that you can count on. So you can have a link now pointing to a given paragraph in a Word document or a given something of this sort. And not only that, but the links, as we had, can have view specs in them. So that says, this link says, go get that document, transform it, and show me this view starting from that point, and highlight it in certain ways. So this can start opening the door for the kind of flexible capabilities we had for there. And it means that you could put this in the middle, nominally, of not today's environments where everybody doesn't have to move to this thing. Some people can start using this and have these kind of link and points to the kind of working file that everybody else is using and doesn't have that capability. And it's an evolutionary approach. And then there's a link database that keeps track of what links are pointing to what that are using this server. And so they're very interesting things that can do. So he says, okay, you want to be able to link into audio and video, etc. too, and movies, or CD-ROM linked to a certain place in it, etc. So these are the legacy types, which we don't have to go in detail of something where it says, okay, how would you be able to link into any of those things to particular things? And the link database says, okay, for every link exercised in this environment, you know what the target object is, the high resolution location of the link that got you to that target in its home file, the link type designation, because the links have syntax that say you can have a link type. So anyway, you'd like to know what that is. And for some link types also, the content, they come with a note, comment note. And that comment note might actually have another link or so that says, hey Fred, that's a pretty weighty thing you're talking about. I wonder if you've checked with such and so, and a link pointing off to there. So part of the viewing that you could look at this with would say, I want to see where I'm having, in this document I'm looking at, are there any links pointing to it? Oh yeah, there's 17. Well, I just want to see those from a certain class of people. Okay. Or certain types. Okay, let me see the comments that might be on them. So this would give you a great deal. So anyway, these are things I've dreamed about for years, and we did quite a bit of them. So the value is that they'd be able to be done with legacy top. So as I was getting ready to come over here the last week or two, thinking that, what about if there were a growing class of people out there in the world that started to use a hyperscope? How much could Google services start doing it that they'd be able to indicate to Google that they're a hyperscope user? So could Google start extending its service so that it would give them the explicit location of the passages that incurred the hit that they got and the views that go on? And it seemed to be very interesting. So then, the other thing about this high-resolution linking is it would be such a good support for the thing that's grown up to be the argument structuring thing. Does anybody know what that means? Are they just very bashful? anyway, that.
The structure of conversation, people take sides, so is that what you're referring to?
Yeah, we have a graph portrayal of functional associated with different kinds of connections between them, framework shaping observations. I think an actual argument, and where that argument is still open or resolved or whatever. And so, to my mind, that's an absolutely essential part of our future. And there's a group that doesn't get enough publicity about that that's been working. So anyway, so these are things that I just counsel you, if thinking about pulling together the knowledge that really represents the best understanding for any given situation, that's certainly going to be a part. So here's one of the best books about it that's got a whole bunch of connections about describing it. And for instance, here's a diagram pulled out of it that says, okay, these are the assertions you're doing it. But all these different arrows between them are connections that would be typed as links. So that can be pulling out explicit passages from any place to sort of represent in an argument structure, which would just be extremely, extremely valuable for all of that. So anyway, so just as I'm sure that there are in the software world specialty roles and specialty capabilities. So it's going to be that way in the knowledge world too. And anyway, so this is like saying if you're going to get these network information communities going, what are the candidates? So universities, government agencies, professional societies, and philanthropics, special improvement infrastructure. So he says, oh boy, if we really get that going and learn how, it'd be really nice to start showing the philanthropic organizations how the challenges they're trying to go, that they could then fund people and very explicit handing them the capabilities and know-how to go after it and build the best understanding they can of the situation they're trying to deal with. And then you get says, oh, professional societies too, that's what they're trying to do. Well, universities, if you can get around their peer review things and stuff, get that. Government agencies, yeah, good chance. And he says, how about businesses? So this is a special challenge in there about businesses. What I've had explained to me that the tech support people don't want to bring in any alien, unquote, application packages inside their world. It's okay to have a browser supported by a server or something. So okay, that lets us have the hyperscope give a chance to be in there. But how much more about really building DKRs and the machinery you need to do that. So anyway, so we did a kickoff about finding a couple of university professors that had a chance to apply and get a course okayed, that they're trying to work with the undergraduates about this, because to my mind, a very flexible set of citizens in the undergraduate universities that could start doing interesting things. So one of them is Valerie Landau here, who has a class like this at Cal State University, so if you want to ask her questions. And Jamie Dinkelliker works with her. And so here's some reference links, and this, I guess, will be posted, this stuff, so you can go look at the kind of things where some of the background on this can be reached. So, if there are no further questions, thank you. But anyway, it's really kind of a puzzle to me that as I wave my hands and go through some of these things, it takes quite a while to digest each of the steps we've been through. So, if there's a discussion, I'd welcome it. Or if you want to, yeah.
So you talked about enabling an infrastructure to kind of leverage collective intelligence in general, but it seems like we have certain problems that we're already kind of doing that, like, for example, the Human Genome Project. It's a worldwide effort where different labs are contributing to the sequences, and now that the genome sequence, we have people all over the world attaching knowledge to that framework in terms of discovering protein structures and things like that. So that's maybe an instance of your general framework. I mean, how would you relate those to, like, the particular particular instance towards your view of what we could do?
I feel what we need to do is get somebody to start to do some new research trying to say, hey, what are examples of this DKR out there? And how many of them provide what kind of functional advantage and capability? And among those I listed, there's still the genome, et cetera, is not supporting the kind of argumentation, et cetera, going, and that you will really get into some of them. And so he says, okay, if some research outfits started to get better and better, understanding how you can actually do this DKR more effectively, what it requires of the community that's using them to learn the ways of studying it and contributing to it, and where do you find the special teams that can probably do the high quality integration. So it's there to go after. And going after that would be terrific, because the better you can learn how to do that, and you can hand it across to any of the philanthropics that says we're going after these big problems, they'd be able to go better at that. So getting the best examples you can, and then just like in the programming they did for a while of how do you judge the, what do they have at the capability level? How do you judge the capability level, the DKR development of a given community? And it'd be very, very handy to start getting measures of that, to say, which is almost like saying, hey, what's your relative IQ? And so anyway, that's my dream. Yes?
Your slide on diagramming arguments made me think about, and probably prompted by current politics, places where we're having a lot of arguments thrown back and forth from two organizations that aren't necessarily willing to share all of their structure. So essentially, they would collectively we're trying to solve a problem of, for example, who should we elect?
Right.
And we have two bodies of knowledge, or more than that, we'll say, two particularly vocal bodies of knowledge, but these two communities are probably not willing to share all of their knowledge or all of their interface with their knowledge with each other or with someone else. I'm wondering if there's any sort of way of, or I'm wondering if it's worth thinking about a protocol or a means for, I guess, for sharing or jointly working out when you're not willing to essentially completely expose everything in your knowledge base.
That's exactly the kind of thing that I think, oh boy, if we really got that going. So there are a lot of people educated in our society about what makes a really good DKR. You'll be using it in your businesses and all of that. So you says, okay, our society really, really better build good DKRs that are equivalent to the news services. What's really happening? And then you say, I need to know more and more about what's going on in our government in order to facilitate the democracy. Because now, if all the best you can do is vote for somebody, and what kind of a picture you're given by the time it gets twisted in the different kind of releases and such as that, gives you a very, very hard job to make a decision based upon what would be the best for the country in this situation or something. So that's part of what I feel. If we don't as a culture develop this capability of getting a lot more effective with our collective IQ, I just, we'll be spiraling into no man's land. So it's really important, and that's what keeps me stumbling along. Okay.
I guess I'm a little concerned that as we build better tools for managing complexity, like, for example, Java docs are wonderful tools for dealing with all your defining your classes and your and so on. If people just take that and then build more complicated systems rather than spending the effort to make simple systems. And in the extreme example, countries like C++, which has massive gratuitous complexity, because some people, in ENIAC, there are some people like that and deal with that. But there's that much less brain power left to deal with the actual problem at hand. Are we backsliding here over the last few decades, or are we making progress?
That's the kind of thing we've got to get smarter at assessing, really. And so how do you get to understand what the situation is? I hate to keep using that as a thing, but almost every significant issue you talk about, how are you going to educate people better? Well, there's so much more to learn, so much more pressure. Well, should we break them up into specialists very early or what? Or, what class of, how many of our citizens have to know how to read, to know how to analyze, know how to check an argument out to see that it's okay, etc. How much trust do they need to have in the people that are doing it on their behalf? Like how much trust you have on the accountants here that can tell you what the overhead figures are. That, a lot of people in here probably couldn't go looking at the books and derive it, so you depend upon these certified people that are accountants. So they're probably certified logicians that can go through the argument structures, and so they ought to be open so anybody can go through and check them. But so to me, it's just not something that would be nice, that would add profit to the companies or something. It's something that if we don't learn how to do that in a very significantly effective way, I just don't see that there's the slightest thing that guarantees our continued survival. I got this picture. I wish I had a cartoonist that could do it. Great big lumbering vehicle. It's got wheels all over the place. Lots of compartments in it with different kinds of people living in them. And it goes lumbering over rougher and rougher ground. And the ground is getting rougher, and it's moving faster, and the headlights don't shine far enough ahead. And besides, no one can be quite sure who's steering it or how. And so he says, what's the chances that vehicle is not going to just go crash? And it's going, it's going to propel faster. So I've just grown more and more sure, not very happily about it, but more and more sure that that's the situation. Anybody want a cheerier?
Kind of a comment on that. Why isn't the intelligence that we've used to get there good enough to help us just keep going forward? Like, why do you think you need this more and more increasing intelligence that's going to just create more and more complicated problems that you don't understand?
Collective intelligence. It's lots of intelligences are working out there all over in accepted cultural frameworks that don't necessarily say we're collaborating. And it's just talk about it. How we the kind of things that if you're a rabid liberal is not the bad term now, a liberal. If you say, hey, how come our national debt went up so high in just 4 years? But there are people taking care of it and such. Well, yeah, but how come? What does that mean? Then the thinking about people just slightly older than you that are going to start being able to retire, and there simply it won't be enough money for their Social Security. And how'd that happen? Whom did we depend upon? Why wasn't that something we're all aware of? Where would we go look to see what the certified logical knowledge about it would be? So, but anyway, if you don't want to be that global about it, just think about if you could do it inside the given kind of project domains you are, how 10 people could get it together a lot better to understand what it is the project is, what opportunities, possibilities, hazards, da-da-da.
Your model for DKRs combining to form larger DKRs, is there kind of an implicit assumption that people who are contributing knowledge are being correct and honest, or is there some concept of weighting these things by authority or by reputation or some mechanism to ensure that, when you're looking at the large-scale picture, you're actually getting reliable information rather than just what somebody had to weigh?
The thing about these argument structure things are that anybody can contest it. You point to something and say, I contest that because of this or that. And as long as they're sort of open contests like that, you say there's a question about whether or not this assertion is valid. And so that could be open. So where do you get the data, et cetera, to tie it down together and finally check it? But it isn't done that way now. People can make assertions that you just have to trust them. And oh yeah, today's world anyway. So unless we do that, it's sort of like adding up the arithmetic or adding up the accounting system to see that it adds up. And if somebody's been filing false expense claims, that could throw everything off until you find out. Say that must something wrong, so it must be So anyway. But one of the things I would be interested in is sort of with people with the kind of skill and talent in here about having some more discussion at a time about that hyperscope idea and getting it tried, getting going. And at another time, if I get this neural system we call Augment, we got some money from DARPA 6 or 8 years ago that we're going to rewrite that in Smalltalk and VisualWorks. And so all we did is a client-server thing. So the client was absolutely the minimal kind of local computation power you can imagine. It was usable in the 70s, and it couldn't work over more bandwidth than the 9600 baud modem, but it still worked very nicely. Everything was done in the server, and the server said what to change on the screen and got all the information. But so we made a new server, new client that worked through the web and through the internet, and just had lots of flexibilities. Could have, n number of windows open at once, but they were all under control of one kind of thing. So they weren't that many different applications running, or different images of one application. They were one application controlling them all. So you could copy and move things between them, etc. Use one for viewing something in one way. Say, I want to jump to that, but in this window. Say, jump there and move over to the other window. Whatever view spec went there would hold. Bingo, that's what you'd see. And many flexibilities. So that provided a way in which we could actually demonstrate some of those things. And 3 months ago, the connections that suddenly stopped working over the internet, and we're trying to find people that can resolve it for us to figure out why. So otherwise, it'd be really real examples of the kind of things I was thinking about and telling you about earlier. So, boy, I was a professor for a while, and I figured I can tell when I put them to sleep.
See your hyperscope thing connecting with the web. Is it like a vastly extended version of the existing web, or does it like sit on top of the web? The web is one of these sources that flows into it, or how do you see it working?
It will still use HTTP kind of thing, and still be able to go get documents. And when it got them, it'd bring them into the intermediary server and transform them. And then you were viewing and dealing with that transformers. And later on, you start saying, well, let me start editing that XML kind of document and store it, and I've got an application growing that can grow to be my open hyperdocument system. But as the first stages of just the hyperscope, it just means that now the links you form can actually look into directly, right into any of these other document forms and to a particular spot in them. Give them the viewing and the manipulation, etc., which would increase the capability of a user a lot to study and move around, find things. And it would be increasing in an interesting way the kind of service Google could offer that class of user. Do you need something more specific?
So do you see your hyperscope being a kind of a super web browser that lets people, input data and, selectively view data and basically I couldn't entirely see why your work isn't like a set of extensions to the existing web. Like, you could have, links, you could add new structures to the link tag with links to, sections of the video video file, for instance, or specific sections of it?
Yes, I can't quite hear you all.
Right. Okay. Okay. I was just
Okay.
I just really wanted to see how you saw this connecting with the existing internet, whether this your hyperscape would be kind of whether it would replace all web browsers, you know.
Would it replace it, or could it be an add? Could it just be an added feature?
And also, what percentage of your stuff could be done just by extensions like W3C standards, rather than being a whole new thing?
We'd like to start getting W3C standards, but for a while, if we just have an HTML here, the transformer will give you the view in that form.
Yeah.
And so we would have to change the receiving part, and there just be slight changes in things you look at the list, and because the list would have a different format.
Right.
So, I think you could do it with just downloading some extensions to your browser, and you wouldn't have to have new unknown applications running in your system.
Doug, might you say a few words on this? So one of the new things that he's talking about is actually looking at your database. And imagine if individual users had actually linked databases in their own system which actually tracked your passage, and those linked databases could actually communicate with a database, say, Google. So this was my actual hypothesis about how his stuff could translate to relate to Google, is that you could actually have a search for hyperobjects in which you could actually specify link types and view types as well as the kind of normal search. So that was just one potential extension of how what he's talking about would.
So I guess with the hyperscope, you're sort of applying sort of the semantics or some sort of semantic to a set of documents simply by their link structure and what these links mean and so on. What's the advantage of doing that versus embedding those semantics in those documents directly? So there's all this, I guess, work to create a semantic web where you essentially more directly describe what certain things on certain pages means. And you can do all sorts of neat things with this information, embedded directly in the page. How would you integrate something like that with Hyperscope?
I thought you were describing a hyperscope. I thought you were describing what a hyperscope could provide.
With Hyperscope, as far as I understand it, the semantics are implied by sort of this external metadata that you have this link structure and these links mean certain things and so on, versus having semantics embedded directly in the information you're linking to.
So that could evolve as people evolve their documents that they're developing, and those that shift into building on the hyperscope's intermediate file structure and start evolving an open hyperdocument system. At every stage, it would be interoperable with the legacy stuff, but it could start having more richer metadata and things. And it's like we included something very interesting in ours, that every node, that would be roughly a paragraph or a line of code or something, it had a property that who was the last person that edited it and when. And boy, if that didn't come into interesting things when you get new bugs showing up in the system. And the implicit linking came out of that very nicely, and the inclusion such. It was just a very rich thing that'd be, you sort of have to start showing it to give you the feeling, the flexibility. But anyway, it's not saying that that was the answer, but it was an example of a much richer environment, and a kind that if we don't go after a richer environment, we're short-circuiting ourselves, short-changing ourselves significantly. Hi.
Hi.
these two metaphors of the ants in the tree and the car moving forward under less and less control. And I resonate with both of those ideas, but I wonder if you have any advice on how to communicate with your fellow humans in a way that doesn't make you seem like a kook, so that you lose your credibility and basically you've worked against the cause you're working for.
About a third yours. What do you do about it? You say, well, maybe I have to adjust so I don't seem like a kook. But if you want that community to be more effective and effective, it's just become very important that their educational level kind of grows till the concepts that they have to deal with, they have a good enough metadata, rich enough vocabulary. And so if what we're trying to talk about is really improving our collective ability, we just have to be collectively improving the scopes of our vocabulary. And it's a lot of these concepts that I evolved, and I'm not sure whether I evolved them before the first examples of implementation, but I really know that like the system we built so you could set the profile for a person, so when they started they had a very limited vocabulary of nouns and verbs, just like in object-oriented. And so they got along fine. Then they could start adding more when they wanted to. And once they had that freedom, it was very secure. But you'd be surprised at how rapidly someone would say, I want more, I want. And the rate of learning was much higher than it would be if you were there and had to drill everybody to say it's time for you to boost your vocabulary.
Thanks again.